Well, greetings. My name is Kate Rademacher, and I'm delighted to be here with Writing for Your Life and Compassionate Christianity. I'm so thrilled to be getting a chance to interview a co-author and a colleague of mine, Patrice Gopo, and she's going to introduce herself in a minute. And just to say that we're really looking forward to hearing about your new book, Patrice, Autumn Song. It's beautiful. I'll tell you more about when and where I was when I was reading it, but just to say congratulations on its launch. It's such a Your writing is so somebody described you as lyrical, and I really, you know, I can see that and feel that. Like I felt very restful as I was reading your book, which is what I need in this difficult and stressful
Mhm.
time. So thank you so much for your words. And if you could start by telling us a little bit about you, maybe where you live and how we can find you if we're interested in learning about your writing. And then just sorry, like how did you get to this place of writing? I know this is your second adult book and you have a children's book or two. So can you just tell us a little bit about your writing journey? Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, Kate, thank you so much for having me on the program. It's really a delight to be here today, and I really appreciate the work that Writing for Your Life does. So it's just an honor to be able to share a little bit about my writing journey and a little bit about my books with the Writing for Your Life community. So thank you again for having me. But yeah, just to share a little bit about who I am. My name is Patrice Gopo. I am an essayist and picture book author. So I am actually the author of two essay collections. My first one is called All the Colors We Will See, which the book is behind me up there if you're trying to see it. And then my second essay collection, which just came out at the beginning of September, is this one, Autumn Song, Essays on Absence. And as you mentioned, I also write picture books. My first picture book is called All the Places We Call Home. And interestingly enough, that picture book is based on one of the essays in All the Colors We Will See. So I'm a big proponent in our writing lives of thinking of the ways we can reimagine our work in other forms. But just to say a little bit about my writing journey, I did not begin as a writer. That's not what I studied in college by any stretch. I actually studied chemical engineering. And then I went on to get MBA and a Master's of Public Policy because my interest was in working with issues of material poverty and working to address that potentially through nonprofit organizations, NGOs, and micro entrepreneurship. So that was the trajectory I was on. And as it turns out, when I was finishing graduate school, I wrote a grant to go work with some women in South Africa, in Cape Town, South Africa, helping them start small businesses as a mechanism for alleviating material poverty. And it was during those 10 weeks that I was in South Africa that I actually ended up meeting the person I ended up marrying. So when we got married, I actually moved to Cape Town and I no longer had, well, I shouldn't say I no longer, I didn't have a work permit. And so I wasn't actually able to engage with getting a job in the field that I was trained to do. And Kate, it was in this particular season of my life that I started writing. And it's interesting because I feel as though I was always a person interested in writing, but more so in the standpoint of like journaling and things. So I've been keeping journals for years, but it was in this particular space that I started my writing journey. And that is where I look back as the beginning of what would become, what it is now as a person who now has authored several books. And I teach a lot about writing and I speak a lot about the topics that I write about. I hadn't mentioned it yet, but I'm the Black American daughter of Jamaican immigrants, and I was born and raised in Anchorage, Alaska. And I share that. I know it's a lot of things piled in there. And I share that because I find that I return to many of the same themes again and again. So I often return to themes of belonging and home and place and racial identity formation. And I feel like that is an outpouring of my origin story in many ways, and that those are the questions that I've been asking myself across my life, and that is what shows up on the page. So that's a little bit about me. If anyone wants to find out more about me, you can go to patricegopo.com, and yeah, you'll find the links to my social media, other things I've written, all of that there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. And I really, I love this book, and I want to again tell you a little bit about how I came when I was reading it because it was kind of a funny setting. But before I do so, because it's relevant to what I want to ask you about, it's just you talked about some of your themes that you write about, and
Mhm.
a big theme of this book is absence.
Yes.
The subtitle is Essays on Absence, and I really didn't clue in on that until I started reading your introduction, and I don't know if you wanna read to us, I'm looking at the bottom of page 2, or maybe just describe to us kind of like what is this idea of absence, and, how does that sort of run as a theme throughout your book? And I think my question as a writer is, did you know that was the theme when you were working on the book, or did that sort of come as you were curating it afterwards? Thanks.
Absolutely. And I will say I'm happy to read a little bit. I didn't find that super quick while we were talking, so I can go look in a second to get to that section. But I love your question because I feel like there is such truth to this idea that we often come back to some of our same themes again and again, but we may not always realize that we are doing that. So I know with my first essay collection, it actually took a writing teacher to point out to me that I was circling around some of the same themes again and again. And I knew that maybe at a very high level, but it was her pointing that out that made me take more notice of what was going on. And so with my second collection, I think I was already a little bit attuned to this idea that there's probably more happening here than I'm just recognizing at the surface as I'm writing. And so when I realized that the amount of essays I had was beginning to form this second collection, I had this vision for a second collection. I actually went through a fairly systematic approach in order to try and unpack what some of those other themes were that were going on. And I mean, I don't need to get all into it now, but I'll just say it did involve some spreadsheets and stuff as well. So I feel as though that's probably the engineering mindset that still speaks into my writing life. But the other thing that I think is true, Kate, is yes, there was this systematic approach, but then there's this other, I don't know, something else that's going on that I think is whispering to us what might also exist there. And I feel as though those two things were really coming together. So when I first was looking at the essays that I felt were going to be part of this collection, a number of them were already written. Some of them were previously published. Some of them I had written, but they were just kind of sitting on my computer, not doing anything. And when I first started thinking, I think there's a collection here, my immediate inclination was, oh, I think this is about loss. There's something related to loss here. And I kind of moved that word around in my head over the months as I was continuing this process of discerning which direction this collection was headed. And it just didn't feel like it fully encompassed what I was feeling, what was stirring within me. It felt like there was another word there. And I don't know if anyone who's listening to this has ever had that experience when you're writing where you almost put a placeholder word in to hold the place. You know it's going to be something else, but you just need something to hold the place for right now. So loss became that word for me until I continued with this process, continued examining each of these essays, continued identifying the multiple themes that were there. And it was in that process, and honestly, I'll just say, continuing to pray about this, because that's something I very much bring as a spiritual practice to my writing too, is I recognize that it's not just me creating here too. And so absence emerged. And when that word emerged, I knew that was exactly what this was. I knew that that was what would encapsulate everything that was part of this collection and also would help me discern what maybe didn't belong in the collection because it wasn't really writing towards that theme.
Well, that's really beautiful, and it's really helpful to hear your process. I mean, I'm so glad that you talked about prayer. I mean, often use the word discernment, but the discernment is fueled by prayer. So I think I'm really
Mhm.
glad that you are saying that. And I just think it's interesting this idea of your like, the words tumbling through your mind over time. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
Um, so
absolutely.
let me tell you about where I was when I was reading your book. And I sent you a brief email, but my husband and I had a wonderful trip this summer and we came back feeling calm. And then, we
Mhm.
re-entered the United States of America, which is a stressful place for multiple reasons,
Mhm.
including that there was a shooting on my daughter's first day of school. And so she spent her first year of 12th grade in lockdown. She spent her first day of ninth grade in the pandemic and her first day of 12th
Wow.
grade in a lockdown. And because there was a shooting in Chapel Hill, UNC, that tragically led to one person dying. So, it's just we're really living in difficult times. And
Mhm. Mhm.
that week we had to put our cat to sleep, and my husband had crazy pain. And as some
Mm.
people know, my husband has Parkinson's disease, so we didn't know what was going on. It turned out he had a kidney stone. Anyway, this is all to say that I took my husband to the ER on our like day 3 home, and I grabbed my purse and your book. And so
Um,
I sat in the waiting room at UNC for like or 7 hours, and all I had to do is read your book, and it's beautiful, and it made me feel so much calmer. So thank you for that ministry. We don't always know where people or when people read our books, but your book was really a ministry to me in a stressful moment. And so I've told you a little bit about my marriage, and one of the things I love about your book is that you write about your marriage really honestly and in a very loving way. And I have a very, it seems like, I haven't gotten through all of the book, but can you just tell us a little bit about your marriage and how you write about it in this collection? And also, is your partner supportive of all this writing you're doing? Is there any discomfort there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so I will say, my husband Yasha, he is one of my just greatest supporters. I was actually going cleaning out my office the other day, and many years ago when I was very early in my writing journey and I was really struggling to find acceptances for my work. I was receiving a lot of rejections, and it was just a struggle because I kept thinking, what am I even doing here? And I remember he came home one day and he had this manila folder, and he had gone and researched ways in which you submit your work and articles about how to deal with rejection and just these different things that he printed all this out and brought it home for me. And it was a remarkable encouragement at the time. And I saved that folder. And the reason I saved it is not so much that I still need the information, because when I look back on it, now I know all the things that are in there, I that I've read in other places, but it just reminds me of the beauty of having others on our journey who help support us in what we're doing and support us in the direction that we're headed and what that can mean. And I mean, my encouragement for anyone out there who's pursuing a creative life is to look around and think, who are the people who are supporting me? Now, we're not all going to have the exact same sets of people. So, some people's parents will be really supportive, other people's parents, for example, won't, whatever. But I think what I feel is really important is identifying who those people might be in your life. So that's one thing I'll say. I think the other thing that I feel in this book, that yes, I have at times written about my marriage, and in my first book as well, I will at times write about my marriage. I do feel like there's often a particular reason in which I am engaging with those stories. So I do feel like when I choose to tell a particular story that interacts with other people in my life, particularly in my immediate family, or my family of origin, there's a particular purpose in why might be telling that story. So I think by and large, I generally have a sense of an essay is not just about them and their particular experience and something that happened, that really there needs to be some particular reason it might be transforming me and the way that I'm seeing the world if I'm going to bring it in. And that's just kind of the boundary I've created. And I think the other thing that's very true too is with my immediate family, my family of origin, I let them read things in advance before they are out in the world. Now, I think people are going to have varying opinions about that. And I should also be clear, I don't necessarily give people permission to say, well, if you don't like it, then that's the end of it. But I do want to keep that conversation open if there's something that someone would want to, address or be concerned about or anything of that nature. So, yeah, so that's kind of the way that I have navigated that. But I do think one of the reasons too, I value writing about my marriage as well is I think that it adds maybe another layer of complexity to the narrator who is on the page. So, as I write from the perspective of being a Black woman, child of immigrants, I think it can sometimes be too easy to, I guess, focus in for people, for readers to focus in on certain aspects of my story without seeing the wholeness of who I am. And part of what I hope is that as I kind of interact with these different aspects and layers of who I am, it creates a full person on the page.
That's really interesting and amazing. Well, I love hearing you talk about this. Thank you. It makes me thinking back about reading the book, just, brings it more into focus. So thank you for that.
Mhm.
So tell me what you're doing to get the word out. I know this is a hard time for writers. We're still sort of like emerging from the pandemic and the world has really changed. Are you doing hybrid events? Are you doing in-person events? Will you come here to Chapel Hill, and notwithstanding gun violence, would you maybe we
Oh,
can talk about, we have
yeah.
a amazing local bookstore. My local bookstore is Flyleaf. I'd love to have you here because you really have such a wonderful, I don't know, I really love your voice. So maybe my two questions are, how's it been launching the book, and what are you doing to get out the word? And then can you just talk a little bit more about this idea of voice? Because I know I as a writer feel like I'm in a season where I sense that my voice is changing from sort of
Mm,
my younger voice to a more kind
mm,
of middle-aged voice. And so
mhm,
that's,
yeah.
I've just lived, I'm just older, so
Mhm, mhm,
so just like, can you talk a little bit about your voice, and how is that something that you cultivate intentionally? Do you let the sort of Holy Spirit guide you? Is it kind of a
mm.
combination of, I don't know. Maybe you can just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so maybe I'll start with the second question first, the one about voice. And I definitely feel our voices as they show up on the page will change over time because they are influenced by the experiences we live and the reality of our lives. And so I think there is a lot of space for that. I remember years ago I had a writing residency and I met an author that I had read some of this author's work previously, and then I just happened to run into her while I was at this residency, and she was talking to me quite a bit about that. So I think she was probably in her 60s or 70s maybe, and had been writing for decades. And I remember her saying this thought that, the challenging part about writing is at times people will want you to write in the way you once did, even though the way you once did is no longer part of the way you tell stories now. And I just felt like that was a lot of wisdom. And it was interesting for me because at the time, I don't think I had yet experienced that happening, but I remember hearing it and thinking, these are words I need to hold on to because I'm a human being who is shifting and changing. And I think as I even talk about in this essay collection that as we change, there are parts of ourselves that are no longer there anymore. And so I think when it comes to voice, I think I want to cultivate an openness to recognizing the reality that the way in which I may have even crafted and composed sentences in the past may not be the way I'm always going to craft and compose sentences. But it doesn't change me from like I'm no longer a writer or something because I don't do it in the way
You don't have
that.
that backstory. I mean, you still have the same backstory, but the way you narrate it to yourself, and therefore
Mhm.
the way you narrate the backstory to the world, is going to shift. And I think I hadn't really recognized that until the last even couple months.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely one of the things that I do in Autumn Song in the introduction is I explain how some of the essays in Autumn Song were previously published. So, I mean, one of the essays maybe 7, 8 years ago in the past that I first wrote that particular piece. And I think when you're putting together an essay collection, there can be space to now go in and edit the work, maybe change it in a way that feels more aligned with who you are now. And and that's fine. I think it's totally fine if people do that. But I actually felt a sense like, I really would like to preserve this the way it was, because I feel as though whatever we write, it creates an artifact of the person that we were at that particular time in life. And for me, a collection on absence felt like a particularly meaningful place in which to seek to preserve an aspect, recognizing that in some ways that narrator is no longer here because I have changed in different
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah. Yeah. There, no, it's true. Well, thanks for that. And so going back to this like first part of my question, tell me
Oh,
about
yeah.
your book launch. How's it going? And are you
Yeah.
having, I guess the question I want to ask you is, are you having any fun? Because that's something that the pandemic really took from me, I realized, is like just
Mhm.
opportunities to have fun, parties and real parties, not just Zoom parties. So are you having a launch party or anything fun like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say something I've learned from my first book launch is doing it in such a way that it feels sustainable for me. So I feel with my first book, it was beautiful and amazing, and there was so much happening. And I was really worn out by the end of it. And I think it's interesting when that's your first book because you kind of think this could be my only book. And so let me do this. But I think at this point what I've realized is this is not my only book. This is not my last book. This is so how can I do this in such a way that I continue to feel excited for this and this process and engaging in that way, but also not wearing myself out from exhaustion. So I think because of that, I have thought I've looked at what I've done in the past. So I've looked at what I did with my first two books and I've kind of identified what felt most meaningful for me, what did I enjoy the most, what did I feel was most helpful, those kinds of things, and trying to prioritize those types of things. So I enjoy speaking at conferences and being on panels. So those are things that I have been working towards doing. I like to write an occasional guest blog post about, what I've about the book. So I've been working on things like that. Just some of those different things that I felt have been helpful and things that I also enjoyed. But one thing that I will share, I did have a party. We I don't know if I would call it a launch party. I more think of it as a celebration party. And I wasn't actually going to do this. And my book, it had some interesting like distribution things happen. So the book didn't actually officially publish until the beginning of September. But at the end of July, some people actually started receiving their copies because the book was in the warehouse already. So not everybody, but some people. And I remember at the time, some people received their copies before I had even received my author copy. So it was all this kind of there was a lot of emotions happening at the end of July, Kate, around all of this because I think the other reality is when that happens, some of the plans that you had for launching your book, it they don't make as much sense now that people already have it. And so there was a lot of that. But, anyways, that first week when the books suddenly started showing up, my family and we went to brunch with some close friends. And just as a way of celebrating, because I thought, well, I'm going to celebrate this. Anyways, let's celebrate this. And as I was explaining to her what happened, she was saying, I think we should have a party for this. And I thought, really? Do you think so? Because I wasn't really planning on having a party. I think sometimes there can be some nerves that are people going to be as interested in your third book as they were in your first book? And just like some of that trepidation that I think is very real. But my friend, she said, no, let's have a party. I really think we
Yeah.
should. I want to throw this party for you. And so she did. And we
Oh,
had this beautiful party. She hosted it at her home and I got an outfit that matched the cover of my
oh my
book
gosh,
and
that's awesome.
yeah, it was just wonderful. It was so wonderful. People came. I shared the introduction from the book. I got to encourage other people to connect with each other. So that's something I'm really big on is creating spaces where people can connect with each other, perhaps based on my book, not necessarily that they have to talk about the book itself, but that it inspires conversation. So I was able to help foster that with people, and it was a beautiful celebration. And I'm so glad that I did it. I am so glad that I did it.
Good. I think as I'm recovering from my own burnout, I know we were talking about that the other day, and
Mhm.
sort of recovering from the pandemic. I'm eager. I have like my party appetite has like back up. So I'm like, how can I get the punch glasses out? What can we party? So, and with that in mind, maybe we can end with I would love to ask you to do a reading from your book. And I have a suggestion.
Okay.
On page 95, you write that maybe you could just read us excuse me, the first section, section one, or whatever you want to read. And
Oh,
I just
yeah.
have to say that you talking about your party made me, as I was reading, I was thinking, wow, having a party with Patrice sounds really fun. Like I could go to one of these parties. So you were very inviting and evocative in your writing. So I just want you to know you might get some more fan club in requests for invitations. So that's the only danger of reading this. But maybe if you can read to us from the chapter called More Than Tea. Does that sound
Sure.
good? Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. I'll read this first section from More Than Tea. I used to host tea parties, a gathering in spring, another in autumn. My invitations brought together neighbors and friends, older and younger, black and white. As the knockout roses began to flower or the first falling leaves drifted to the ground, I decorated a table with assorted teacups and a sugar bowl. For my menu, I offered far more than tea. Curried chicken salad sandwiches dotted with raisins, cucumber sandwiches paired with cream cheese, oven fresh scones served with strawberry jam and freshly whipped cream. The food was rich, the conversation filling. My guests looked forward to the next gathering and then the one after that. I hosted tea parties until I became the woman who used to host tea parties, my teacups dusty from lack of use. Thank you.
I'm getting chills because, this also shows you like you don't know how writing lands on you and you don't always really realize it. I mean, I literally was getting my teeth. This, I was cleaning. I was doing some cleaning in my house, but I literally got out a box of teacups the other day and I almost just put them back in storage. And I was like, well, I'm just going to leave them out and maybe, I'll have a party sometime. So who knows? Maybe you're writing. And I just want to say again, this is that passage, just in hearing you read it reminds me again of what I love about your writing is there's a calming peacefulness. And I think what it is that your attention to detail. I mean, you write a lot more detail than a lot of writers I know about just the scene, the way it feels and how it looks and where your mindset is. It just feels like your writing goes at a calm pace, and that invites me into a calmer pace. So thank you for that. Thank you for that
Yeah,
gift.
absolutely. Oh, thank you for those words. I really appreciate that.
And
I just
well,
love
and
that it has that effect.
I mean, it did. Like your writing calmed my like when I was in the ER and I was, could have been
Mm,
really stressed out, and it just was a
mhm.
ministry in that moment. So thank you. So in that note, maybe we can end by I first of all want to ask you where can we find more about your writing and you, and if we want to
Yeah,
buy the book or I assume it's available on all online sellers. So where
it
else can
is.
we find it? And are there any final words you want to share with us? Do you want to tell us what you're working on currently or anything else?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Okay, so people can find me at patricegopo.com or on Instagram, you can find me at Patrice Gopo. My Facebook page is at Patrice Gopo Writes. And I do have a newsletter if you go to my website, patricegopo.com, and you can see where to subscribe to my newsletter where I share just like some different reflections and other things about twice a month. So I would welcome you to subscribe if you would like to. And in terms of where you can find the book, you can really find it anywhere. But if you go to my website, it will connect you to the various different retailers that you might want to choose from. I'm always a big proponent of encouraging people to purchase from their independent booksellers. So, yeah, that's definitely something. So, in terms of where I'm headed next, I'm actually working on editing an anthology. So I am working on editing an anthology where a group of Black women are reflecting on their friendships with white women. And I'm very excited for this project to eventually be out there in the world. So that is taking up a lot of my time right now. And in addition, I continue to write picture books as well. So I just, I'm continuing to work on my picture books too.
I'm so excited. You had mentioned this new project when we talked the other day, and I'm so intrigued. And as a person who identifies as a white woman, I just think that I have a lot to learn from your words, and so I'm sure it'll be very convicting. And I look forward to. So please keep us informed when that book is ready for launch, and we will be praying for you as you continue to work on that. So
Thank you so
thank you so
much.
much, Patrice. Again, you are, you said something to me also on our phone call this summer that really stuck with me, which is I asked you, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And you said something like, and you just paused and you're like, doing more of the same, more of this. And it really was a gift to me because, I
Mm.
think we have this tendency to go like, what's next? What's the next
Mm.
accomplishment? And where, just to get crazy in our heads. And you saying that really helped me to appreciate where I am in the writing journey and how this is such a gift from God. I mean, look at this conversation. We never would have met each other if,
I know, this
we
is
could have been in a
lovely.
different arena. Like you could be in like finance in South Africa and I work international health, public health. And, we could have,
Yeah.
but here we are. And thanks be to God. So congratulations again on your book of
Thank
Autumn
you.
Song,
Thank you
a
so
essays
much.
on absence by Patrice Gopo. And you said you can find your website is patricegopo.com. Is that what you
That's
said?
correct. Yep,
Great.
patricegopo.com.
All right. Well, and the cat's meowing in the background, so this is probably a good time to end. But again, just thank you so much for your time and for the gift of your words. So
Thank
blessings on
you.
your book
Kate, thank
launch.
you so much.
Thank
It's
you.
been lovely being with you.
Yeah, thanks.